G'day guys, my name is CJ. This is the TicWatch Pro 3 and I've been using it for the last few weeks and it's time to see if it's any good. Let's take a look. TicWatches have remained near and dear to my heart ever since the first one was successful on Kickstarter. It's also one of my most popular videos, so check it out if you haven't already. Link in the description or up in one of these cards up here. But over the last few years, Mobvoi have consistently updated and honed the design of these watches, and the TicWatch Pro 3 is a culmination of the successes and failures of the previous versions. So the most important feature to talk about here is that it rocks the latest Snapdragon 4100 processor. In fact, it's one of the very first Android smartwatches to do so. Most other watches right now have an older 3000 series or even a 2000 series that was still in the previous TicWatch Pro. So this new update that's combined with 1 GB of RAM makes a huge difference in performance. Now, one of the biggest complaints I had with Android smartwatches was that apps always took so long to load. So long that you just end up giving up and reach for your phone instead, kind of negating the whole point of a smartwatch in the first place. But now, the 4100 processor results in performance that is way more responsive. And we're not talking about just swiping around the UI, because honestly, that was never the problem. Apps were. Now, apps take about 1 to 2 seconds to load as opposed to 5, 10, or even 15 seconds, and you actually want to use all the features on offer. It's not instant, but it's certainly way quicker than it used to be. Now, everything from loading up Spotify, Google Maps, Google Pay, things that actually matter in a smartwatch finally isn't held back, and I love it. Even Google Assistant loads quickly and reliably, which is incredible, unheard of. And I can't emphasize enough how nice it is to see everything being so snappy. Now, as would be expected for a watch of this price, the TicWatch Pro 3 nails all the usual basics expected of it, including a heart rate monitor, NFC for contactless payments, IP68 water resistance, the latest version of Wear OS. Yeah, unfortunately it doesn't have the ECG feature, but that's only really available in certain products like the Apple Watch or the Galaxy Watch, and it's only been activated in certain markets as well, not including Australia. So personally, I don't consider it a crucial feature, and you shouldn't either, unless you've got specific health concerns that means you actually need it. Plus, as with all TicWatches, it works with both Android and iOS. Now, of course, there are limitations to this experience, and it is of course down to Wear OS itself. The card system that it borrowed from Tizen OS is still here, and the whole notification and menu system is otherwise unchanged, which is to say it's still pretty basic. Mobvoi have added a layer of differentiation of its own with its own menu drawer with a side-by-side grid, but that can always be changed back to the traditional Wear OS design too if you like, and you can also customize the lower button to trigger specific functions or apps. Now, I've got mine set to load Google Pay, but you can use it to load your favorite fitness tracker, calorie counter, or heart rate monitor if you like. Anything really. And then there's more gimmicky features too, like wrist gestures to navigate the UI with a flick of the wrist. But honestly, this will only be useful in a very small minority of cases, unless of course you like developing tendonitis of your forearm. It's also got a usable speaker and microphone set, so that you can use it in a pinch if you need to. I mean, it's never going to be mind-blowing in quality, but it does get the job done, and it does do a decent job of alerting you for calls and other notifications. Plus, the speaker itself also bakes in a water expelling feature, since you can technically take it out for a shallow swim. Now, let's talk about design and hardware, because I think this is probably the TicWatch Pro's biggest advantage, and because ultimately a watch can also be a fashion accessory. TicWatches have always been pretty attractive options, but bar the C2, they've always looked maybe slightly chunkier than its competition. Now, as a male, even with smaller wrists, it's never been a major problem, but I can see how it can be less enticing for people with daintier wrists. Now, comparing the TicWatch Pro 3 with the previous TicWatch Pro, a bit of fat's been trimmed around the edges, and the overall design looks slimmer. And I emphasize looks because the overall dimensions aren't massively different from the previous version, where it's only lost about maybe 0.4 mils of thickness, but it's got smaller, chamfered bezels and a slightly bigger display, which makes the screen look almost like it sits more flush to the surface and prominent, and I think it gives it a real air of elegance. Now, the buttons are spaced out a bit better and has a more tactile clickiness to it, which is really appreciated since the last TicWatch Pro's buttons were just a little bit mushy on the side. But on the whole, it just overall feels nicer to wear. It's 17 grams lighter thanks to the change from a metal plastic hybrid in the previous model to a full plastic shell instead. Plus, instead of being silver and black, it's now changed to a purely matte black sort of model, and it just makes it look that more sleek. I love it. On top of that, it also forgoes the hybrid leather and silicone strap for a fully silicone version. And can I also say, I'm a big fan of the orange stitching that we see on the sides. So all in all, the TicWatch Pro 3 is actually quite comfortable to wear all day. Now what I also like is the dual layered FTSN and OLED display in, well, all TicWatch Pros. On the top, there's a transparent black and white screen that shows basic info like the time, date, battery life, heart rate, and step count, which then sits on top of a nice and sharp OLED screen where it has a 454 by 454 resolution and a PPI of 459, which then displays all the typical smartwatch stuff. Where the magic happens is how it switches seamlessly between the two depending on what you need. It's pretty cool. The FTSN display on its own as well is super legible and crisp in all lighting situations, kind of like any typical digital watch. And then on top of that, the OLED does get bright enough outdoors to be seen, and I like how there's a setting to adjust whether or not the adaptive sensor will err on the side of either being a bit brighter or dimmer depending on your preference. Now if there is one criticism that I'll land on the screen is that the FTSN layer does cause the OLED screen to look a little washed out compared to watches without the dual layered screen. And this is even when you compare to lesser models like the standard TicWatch E2. But comparatively, it is a bit better than the last TicWatch Pro. So overall, it's still a pretty cool feature, and its whole purpose is to save battery life. And honestly, it does that pretty well. So battery life for most Android smartwatches is usually average at best, getting maybe between 1 to maybe 1.5 days. The TicWatch Pro 3 though gets somewhere between 3 to 5 days with typical use patterns. That's to say, using the default settings of how it uses the screens, enabling adaptive brightness, using the OLED for notifications and apps, and FTSN for all other times during the day, and for at-a-glance information. Throughout the whole time, I've never had to worry about whether or not it was going to run out of juice, and it comfortably fit into my routine. I'd imagine if you forgot to bring your charger for a weekend trip, I reckon it'll probably survive no problems. And in a pinch, you could ultimately switch it to essential mode, which basically disables everything aside from information you get from that FTSN screen, which in reality still includes quite a few useful features. So in addition to the time and date, it'll still track your heart rate, still track your sleep, and the step count as well. And if you relied solely on essential mode, the battery is rated up to 45 days. So in the majority of situations, it should last you well until you're able to put it on the charge, no problems. Now let's talk about the few things I'm not so fond of. The vibration motor. I think the vibration motor is still one of the weakest parts of the TicWatch Pro, but really it's a complaint that I've got for almost all smartwatches that aren't made by Apple. And this even includes Samsung Galaxy watches, because there's something intangible about how much more premium a device feels and is perceived when a device has really nice and tight haptics. I mean, it's a small detail, but the weak buzzing feeling, the sound it makes, and the poor experience you get from these watches does take away from the overall feeling of quality, especially with the TicWatch Pro 3 when you compare it to the nice, tight and pointed taps you get from a Taptic engine in the Apple Watch. And finally, the software baked in the TicWatch Pro is a little hit and miss. Mobvoice fitness apps are about as accurate as you can get for a smartwatch wearable, so comparing to Google Fit, Samsung Health, it does basically the same things with a reasonable level of reliability or accuracy, and it activates automatically when it senses you've started exercising, which is nice. But personally, I'm not too bothered by these features, and I'd say they're at least on par with the competition. But because of this, it's just another added layer of bloat that probably isn't necessary, and there's no real killer feature or anything overtly unique with Mobvoice's suite of apps that would make me want to use it over something like Google Fit or any other health trackers. It retails for $300 or 450 Australian dollars, meaning it's cheaper than a Series 6 Apple Watch or the Galaxy Watch 3, but it is more expensive than other pretty compelling watches like the Apple Watch SE or the Galaxy Watch Active 2. In any case, if you own an iPhone, just buy an Apple Watch and stop thinking about it. But for everyone else on Android, I think as far as Wear OS watches go, the TicWatch Pro 3 is really great. It nails all the basics, has the latest processor, and its third iteration is really refined with an excellent fit and finish. And as long as you can deal with its size, you can't go wrong. The fact that it's currently being promoted as the flagship Wear OS device too must mean it's doing something right, and I think you'll enjoy it. Thanks for watching, guys. Give us a like if you enjoyed what you saw, subscribe if you haven't already, ding the bell icon so you don't miss out, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Stay safe, and say good day to your mum for me. Cheers.